Of course, former CIA Director John Brennan. Mr. Brennan, thanks so much for your time. I know that you were listening to the special counsel a few moments ago. What did you take away from what he said, from what you heard?
Well, a couple of things. I think, as already been mentioned, this was potential Bob Mueller. Be precise and careful in his language, making a statement on his terms, and that's why I don't think he wants to be part of any type of political and partisan show on the Hill. And as has been mentioned, I think he would be willing to read his report, but go no further than that. Two, I think he made it quite clear that were it not for existing DOJ policy, as well as a constitutional process that holds a sitting president to account, there is not a basis for him and his team to go forward with an indictment of a sitting president. But also he said very clearly that if he was able to exonerate a president of wrongdoing, he would have done that. So I do think he made it very explicit that there is an outstanding issue when it comes to wrongdoing on the part of Donald Trump on obstruction of justice, and that there are the options of dealing with it while Mr. Trump sits in office by the Congress, and after Mr. Trump leaves office, in terms of following through with some type of indictment so that charges can be looked at and Mr. Trump can defend himself as appropriate.
John Brennan with me now, MSNBC senior national security analyst, intelligence analyst. I think the direct quote you were alluding to there, Mr. Brennan, was, if we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
I don't think he can be any clearer than that. Again, that language is very, very carefully worded. That clearly shows that he could not, in all of his investigative work, demonstrate to his satisfaction, and I think to the public satisfaction, that Mr. Trump did not obstruct justice, but also making it very clear that, again, the parameters that he believed that he had to operate within, existing DOJ policy, as well as the constitutional framework for holding a president accountable, did not allow him to move forward with that charge or indictment. And I think he sees that there is work yet to be done on obstruction of justice. Or
you were wanting to make a point about Congress and Democrats here.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at this in the broader context, because some people say, why, if there's substantial evidence against a sitting president, why doesn't he get charged? Right. Is he not above the law? And there are good answers to this, which we've been exploring, and Mueller takes very seriously, which is the rules treat the president differently, precisely because he is the constitutional officer that takes care that the laws be faithfully executed. I think the larger political dynamic, we've been speaking about the law and the substance here in the half an hour since Bob Mueller came out and addressed the country and made this news. The political dynamics here, Craig, overlap with the legal dynamics, because it is only Congress's job, not the prosecutor, not the press, not the voters. It is Congress's job to decide if and when high crimes were committed. And I think what Mueller did in his own careful way, he never insulted anybody today, obviously. He didn't criticize anyone. But if you read him carefully, as we've been doing, he's saying to Congress, and in the House, Democrats run Congress, I can't do your job for you. I gave you evidence. I gave you a longer report than people ever usually get. Pat Fitzgerald investigated White House. There wasn't a public report like this. And I think that is something that in the days ahead will be interesting to see. Did the country hear this? I don't know. I don't have that good hearing. But did the country hear this? And does the country then say, well, Congress, you said wait for Mueller. Mueller finished. Then you said, well, we need to hear from him publicly. And that took up some time. And Mueller came out publicly and said, I spoke. And Barr released it publicly, and I don't question his good faith in that decision. And it's up to the Congress, which we knew he put in this report as soon as we got it, to decide whether or not there were crimes in office. Because we've heard, in some ways, we've heard the Speaker try to avoid this day, kick the can down the road. We'll hear from Mueller later. It's not time yet. Mueller says the evidence is here, and Congress has decided this. And then he says what Mr. Brennan just repeated, and what you pointed out in your reporting, Craig. Then he says, if we had confidence the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. Translation, Bob Mueller looked into this. Bob Mueller has a sterling reputation. Bob saying publicly, we don't have confidence the president didn't commit crimes in office, and Congress is the place to adjudicate that, if at all. So this goes right back there for the House to decide or not to decide what to do about it.
Jeremy Bash, we are right now waiting for some sort of response from this White House. One would assume we would get something here very soon. We know that they were all huddled around their televisions at 11 o'clock Eastern, like all of us. Mr. Bash, is that how you heard it? This 448-page report, Bob Mueller saying it is essentially going to speak for itself and all but daring Congress to do something about what he reported.
Yeah, Craig, I was struck by a couple of things. Number one is Bob Mueller leaned really hard into the Office of Legal Counsel opinion that said that you cannot prosecute a sitting president even if you found that he engaged in criminal activity. That was kind of the centerpiece of his statement. It was, of course, present in his report, but the report was 448 pages. It was so long, it was so detailed that it was sort of, I think, hard to get the fundamental point. Number two, he clearly implied that Bill Barr mischaracterized his report, misled the American people and Congress when he rolled this out. This report came out on April 18th. I don't see really anything that Mueller said today that he couldn't have said 6 weeks ago. The reason he had to say it this way is, number one, is because the Attorney General has been misleading the public. Number two is because the President has been misleading the public. And because, number three, there's been a lot of confusion as to whether or not he was, in effect, teeing up the ultimate constitutional question, to Congress as to whether they could proceed with an investigation of the President's high crimes and misdemeanors. And I think the headline out of today's statement was that this was a green light for Congress to investigate and analyze and make decisions on the President's high crimes that could lead to a potential impeachment vote in the House of Representatives.
Mr. Brennan, let me come back to you for just a moment here before we go to Hans Nichols at the White House. Director, based on what we have seen and what we have heard from this Congress, is there any reason to believe that they are going to, in fact, act on Special Counsel Mueller's recommendations or even that 9-minute statement we just got from him?
Well, I think Bob Mueller's public statement today is going to give momentum to those who want to move forward with impeachment hearings. I think there can be no doubt about Mr. Mueller's message that the obstruction of justice issue is not resolved and that there needs to be follow-up action on it. So I do think it's going to give some additional momentum to them. Whether or not they're going to decide to do it, as Ari pointed out, this is not just a legal issue, it's a political issue, and obviously there are political considerations. But I think the cry for impeachment is going to increase, and it's going to be interesting to see how the White House and Mr. Trump reacts to a very clear and I believe very pointed statement by Bob Mueller.
Senior National Security and Intelligence Analyst and former CIA Director John Brennan on the phone with me there. Thank you, Director. Appreciate your time, sir. Let's go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue now. Hans Nichols is standing by. And Hans, again, I go back to this quote. If we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. On its face, that would very much seem to undercut the assertion from this administration time and time again that there was no collusion. It sounds as if the special counsel's office is saying we don't have evidence.
And Craig, that's the challenge for the White House at this hour. The urgent challenge is how do they square what we just heard from Robert Mueller with what William Barr has been saying. Now, I was just trying to get something from press people upstairs. They haven't seem to have decided if, when, or how they are going to respond to what Mueller just said. But you can appreciate their predicament. The challenge they have is not just the immediate reaction and who it comes from, but more importantly and longer term is how do they manage the president's response to what Mueller just said? Because the president has vacillated. He's been all over the place. Sometimes he said Bob Mueller should testify. Other times he says it's ridiculous. We'll wait to see just how the president reacts. We do know from two administration officials that the White House didn't know the content of what Mueller was going to say, so they are being taken by this. They're bringing it all on board and trying to figure out just how they are going to respond on two fronts, both most immediately, but also how you manage the president's Twitter feed and when he interacts with reporters and many of the impromptu opportunities that he sometimes engages with us. Craig?
Hans, out of curiosity, where is the president right now?
Well, last I checked, he was not in the West Wing yet. The tip for always that is whether or not the president, the